How we doing today, planet Earth? My name is Ian Fox, and today I wanted to take a deep dive into all of the DLC content that was made for Fallout 3. For those of you who are watching this video who have not yet seen my in-depth review on Fallout 3, I highly recommend that you take the time to give that video a watch. There are some criticisms that I levied against the game in that video that are going to be relevant here, mainly in regards to Fallout 3's ending. When I set out to re-review this game in its entirety, I decided to run a little bit of an experiment. When I played Fallout 3 for the first time, I played the Game of the Year edition on Steam with all of the DLC installed, and at the end of the day, I walked away absolutely loving it. But there was one complaint that I heard many others make that I would find myself agreeing with on subsequent playthroughs. This criticism is that Fallout 3 isn't that great of a role-playing game, so I wanted to see for myself if that was really the case. When it came to this experiment that I mentioned just a moment ago, at the start of my last playthrough, I took into account all of the things that all of the DLC expansions add to the game, as well as how they affect the game. And ultimately, I chose to play the base game without any DLC installed at all, and what I came to find is that, at least in my opinion, in regards to how you build your character, Fallout 3 pulls off its roleplay aspect pretty well.
Someone cooked here.
The base game does not shower you with skill points and perks as much as people say it does, but I completely understand why people think this, because when you consider the fact that this game is 16 years old at this point, most people who pick up the title will play it with all of the expansions installed. What I have come to find is that until you've done most things in the base game, and when I say most things, I mean until you've basically done everything aside from the final mission, it's best to play the vanilla game, because a couple of these DLC expansions completely obliterate not only the character progression, but also some of the balance. The first expansion we're going to be taking a look at here is Broken Steel, which was the third DLC to be released for Fallout 3. But the reason I'm bumping it up to the front of the line is because it's almost entirely responsible for all of those criticisms. The biggest way this expansion destroys the balance of the game is how it bumps up the level cap from the base game's 20 to 30. This might not sound like it would present any kind of issue at all, but the increased level cap directly causes the game to feel like it lacks any proper roleplay in regards to how you build your character. 10 additional levels means 10 more opportunities to dump increasing numbers of skill points into any other skills you haven't mastered by the time you hit level 30. And as a result, you are showered with skill points, allowing you to master almost every skill aside from just 2. This by itself isn't the biggest issue, as special stats will still ultimately determine how effective a mastered skill can be, but just like the rest of Fallout 3's DLC, Broken Steel comes with a number of perks, the best of which is the Almost Perfect perk, which is unlocked at level 30, and when taken, boosts all special stats to 9.
What the fuck?
I'd say it's fairly likely that by the time you've hit level 30, you've come across a number of the Vault Tech bobbleheads that are littered all around the world, whether they be skill boosting or special boosting. All of the bobbleheads that are assigned to a specific special stat will bump up said stat by 1. So if you just so happen to not find any of them, or you choose to wait until after level 30 to pick them up, you can end up with a 10 in every special stat, making you a perfect character. Don't get me wrong, having a character that is literally the best at everything can be really fun, but when you're allowed to be the best in every way, shape, or form, what reason do you have to not build your character that way? When given the option to build your character to either be perfect or be specialized, choosing a specialized character automatically becomes the inferior option because you're handicapping yourself for no reason. When I played the game for the first time, I finished the base game as well as all the DLCs with every special stat at level 10 aside from agility, just because I so happened to find that bobblehead earlier in the playthrough. Without even knowing I could make a perfect character, I ended up with a damn near perfect character, which again is really cool and was a lot of fun, but that is not at all what Bethesda intended to allow with the base game. With Broken Steel installed, I have found a way to be able to get every single perk that I want, leaving none that I wanted but wasn't able to take because of how much those 10 extra levels lighten up the restrictions on how many skill points and special points you are allowed to accumulate over time. In turn, this removes any and all weight to the decisions you would otherwise have to make when leveling up, distributing skill points, and choosing perks.
Oh, really? That sucks.
In the end, when it comes to how Broken Steel affects the base game, it's kind of up to you whether or not you want to just go for a perfect character from the get-go or start the game without it installed so you can experience the core game as Bethesda originally intended you to. I understand that Fallout as a franchise has always been very well known for all of the decisions that you are often forced to make, but This is not one that the player should ever have been presented with. Regardless, once the main game has been beaten and the expansions have been installed, you're likely going to end up taking the almost perfect perk anyway, because again, there is no reason to not take a perk that is going to significantly benefit you other than to purposely handicap yourself. Also, since Broken Steel allows you to reach level 30, as you get closer to that cap, enemies that are all around the Capital Wasteland become somewhat trivial because of how powerful you become. But luckily, Bethesda knew this would happen and introduced a number of new enemy variants that will still present a challenge even at max rank. My favorite one is the new Enclave Hellfire Trooper that is often equipped with a new DLC weapon called the Heavy Incinerator that is basically a flamethrower that can be very accurate at longer ranges and does some decent damage if you allow them to hit you. Not only do they come with a cool new weapon that is exclusive to them, but they also come with a brand new badass looking set of Hellfire power armor that adds a new and very much welcomed layer to armor progression.
Wow. That's awesome.
Over on the nasty and terrifying abomination side of things, we get the Feral Ghoul Reaver, which for the most part behaves a lot like the other ghouls aside from them wearing a higher tier of metal armor and looking a hell of a lot scarier. Another thing that makes them unique is that if a Reaver spots you from a distance, they will start ripping off chunks of their own flesh and chuck them at you as they attempt to quickly close the gap so they can use their high damage melee attacks. They are also the first enemy of the 4 to be really bullet spongy, giving them plenty of time to rip your throat out if you are unable to take them down first. As for the ever so common super mutants, the new addition they get takes the form of the Super Mutant Overlord. And these guys differ from other mutants aesthetically because they look about 50 times more roided out than any of the other variants, and they look a hell of a lot angrier too. These monstrosities are easily the most lethal out of all of the new enemies introduced in Broken Steel because they make use of a new laser rifle called the Tri-Beam that shoots 3 lasers at once, doing massive damage. Not only that, but they are also extremely tanky since they have more health than most enemies in the game, and they drop some of the best rewards of any enemy in the game, like mini nukes and other high-level loot due to how difficult they are to take on. The one enemy that outclasses the Overlords in terms of tankiness, though, are the last new enemy addition, the Albino Rad Scorpions. The albino rad scorpions are probably my least favorite new enemy because they're just a white rad scorpion that does massive damage when it stings, and from what I can tell, they don't offer anything new aside from a tanky giant rad scorpion with a new paint job. In regards to all 4 of these new enemy types, I think they're all great additions to the game because even though becoming so powerful can make the original enemies easier to kill, the new enemy variations are often surrounded by their lower level counterparts, so in combination, any enemy can still be a threat. Most of the new enemies are definitely a highlight of Broken Steel, but the part that shines the brightest has to be how it remedies the garbage ending that Fallout 3's base game has, and after replaying Broken Steel again for this video, I think it manages to pull it off, for the most part. As a result of the game's ending being poorly written, Bethesda made Broken Steel to try to fix their incredibly baffling writing fuck-up that they capped the main storyline off with. So essentially, there is no other DLC in Fallout 3 that is more fitting of the word expansion than this one because it is quite literally an expansion to the main storyline. When you're playing through the final mission of the story and you reach the Purifier, the nonsensical moment where someone is forced to step into Project Purity and sacrifice their life, despite the big green guy who happens to be immune to radiation standing right in front of you, has been mostly fixed since Broken Steel introduces new dialogue options that allow you to ask Fox to handle it for you so nobody has to die. And what I love about this moment is that he goes, "Oh yeah, duh, that's right, I'm immune to radiation," and then he'll just head on in. That's it. That's all Bethesda had to do in the first place, but instead, they chose to go with the retarded ending, and not even the good Lord understands the reasoning behind that decision. Like I said, I think this moment fixes the issues I had with the ending, but I also said for the most part for a reason, because after Fox activates the Purifier, Ron Perlman comes back and basically calls you a pussy for not sacrificing yourself, even though it was totally unnecessary to do so.
Good job.
To be honest, I think he does this because it wasn't in their budget to have Ron come back to re-narrate just a single ending, so they just stuck with one they already had and threw it in there so you would still get to watch a cutscene. In hindsight, I think it would have been a good idea to just leave it out entirely, considering that this isn't the ending anymore. Even from outside the chamber, the power surge is enough to knock you into a coma for 2 weeks, from which you wake up and get to experience the Capital Wasteland after the initial ending of the game. From here, the main storyline continues, continues, and Bethesda made sure to take the opportunity to expand on the conflict between the Brotherhood and the Enclave, as well as how the Brotherhood is handling being in control of distributing free, clean drinking water around the capital wasteland. The stories involving the Brotherhood and water distribution take the form of 3 brand new side quests. There's one called Protecting the Waterway, where you defend water caravans from raiders, another called Holy Water, where you put an end to the first off-branch of the Children of Adam that are trying to turn people into ghouls, and the last one is called The Amazing Aqua Cura, and it has you expose a snake oil salesman who is rebranding the clean drinking water as his own miracle cure for ghoulification. A lot like the base game side quests, these ones are more of the black and white type of decision making, like doing good versus evil, but like I said in my main review, just because the story is simple doesn't make it bad, as I still find the new side quests to be quite enjoyable. As for Broken Steel's bigger story beats with the Brotherhood and Enclave, we get more epic moments of the Brotherhood taking the fight to them. One of my favorite parts of this conflict comes right at the beginning, where you get to experience more of Liberty Prime's badassery as he pummels his way to an Enclave hideout, but unfortunately along the way he gets hit by an airstrike in a devastating blow to the Brotherhood advance that completely destroys him.
Oh no!
A while later, Broken Steel leads you to Fallout 3's epic new finale at Adams Air Force Base, where the 2 military powers go head-to-head with all of their might in an attempt to stomp out one another. The Brotherhood even equips you with a new weapon called the Tesla Cannon, which essentially shoots one large burst of electricity at your target, doing massive damage upon contact, as well as electrocuting them over time. You do have to reload after every shot though, so its power is balanced by the speed in which you can reload it. What's great about this thing is that not only does it do massive damage to standard enemies, but it will also destroy a vertibird in a single shot, so it's useful against the ones that will fly around and fire rockets at you. I love the Air Force Base part of the game, because you get to see one last epic battle between the 2 power armor-clad factions where they just throw everything they've got at one another, vertibirds and all. Unfortunately, you aren't involved in the bigger battle, as you're kinda off to the side, occupied by your own smaller one, but it's still awesome to see both military powers go head-to-head in the background as you fight to complete your own objectives. After the battle on the runway, you enter the centerpiece of all Enclave operations, which is this gigantic landcrawler that looks a lot like Fallout 3's version of a Jawa barge. This thing basically acts as a gigantic dungeon full of the remaining Enclave troops, and as you fight your way through the landcrawler, you locate the mainframe, and it is here where we get the true ending to the main storyline and yet another of Fallout 3's black and white decisions, where you call in an airstrike on the Air Force Base, effectively putting an official end to Enclave tyranny.
But wait! There's more!
Or you can call in an airstrike on a number of other locations like important towns, Project Purity, and even the Citadel. This list of choices reminds me a lot of the Power of the Atom quest from Megaton, because it really isn't much of a decision as to what you're going to do, because there isn't much reason to do the evil thing other than to see what the consequences are and then reload a previous save. It kind of seems like these options were implemented with no other thought than what if I could, which in itself isn't a bad thing, but it doesn't make you have to think about what the best thing to do might be. Something I haven't mentioned about Broken Steel yet that makes it stand out to me from the rest of the DLCs is that it's not just an expansion where you go to new places outside of the main map like Adams Air Force Base. There are times in this DLC where you are spent to explore both new and old locations in the Capital Wasteland that were previously inaccessible, like the White House, which unsurprisingly is mostly just a big hole in the ground, and even the presidential metro tunnels, which have their own unique aesthetic compared to any of the other metro tunnels in the game, and just so happen to be the home of the most annoying Reavers in the entirety of the game, because for some reason they're glitching out constantly, making them hard to shoot. I don't know why this is a bug that never got fixed. I've played Fallout 3 on PS3, Xbox 360, and PC, and on all of them, this small group of Reavers are always like this. Of course, we do have to remember that we are talking about Bethesda here, so is it a bug or a feature? Despite the gripes that I have with how Broken Steel changes up the core experience of the base game in a negative way by pretty much forcing your hand into becoming a jack-of-all-trades, master of everything, and obliterating the balance of character progression, I still think this is one of the best DLCs of the bunch. It offers engaging side quests with a much-needed continuation of a grand conflict that we only got to see a single battle of at the end of the vanilla game. And I'm really happy with how Bethesda gave the fans what they wanted by fixing that god-awful ending with a little bit of a rewrite, aside from Mr. Perlman shaming you, which is always an L for the ending no matter what. In a way, Broken Steel is kind of like a reflection of the base game. It has its flaws, but when you look at the whole package, you still feel happy that you took the time to experience it. With that being said, I am stoked that I can say the exact same thing about the Operation Anchorage expansion, which was the first DLC to be released for Fallout 3. Compared to Broken Steel, Operation Anchorage is a much thinner expansion, and what I mean by that is the whole experience is significantly more linear. There are no side quests to accompany the storyline that this DLC tells, or even big decisions to make, but that isn't a problem for me at all, because I happen to really enjoy everything that Operation Anchorage brings to the table. For starters, it expands on the Brotherhood outcasts a bit more, by allowing you to come to their rescue against a super mutant attack, and because of that fancy Pit-Boy on your arm, you also happen to be the perfect candidate to enter a dangerous military simulation that gives us a glimpse into the resource war between China and the United States that eventually caused the two nations to destroy the world. The outcasts need you to enter the simulation and complete it so that they can access the technology inside, but before you even speak to their leader, if you listen carefully, you can see that there is already some pre-existing internal friction between the outcasts, as some of them don't like the idea of working with a local nor sharing any of the loot. The simulation is split up into 3 acts, and what's great is that all of them are paced really well and are a lot of fun to play through. Once inside the sim, you are met with a beautiful snowy tundra in the Alaskan mountains with the task of infiltrating a now Chinese-occupied American military base with the goal of wiping out the artillery that is shelling the American front line. This part is either all about stealth, or you can do the usual and just go in guns blazing, but I always enjoy making my way across the catwalks, frozen pipes, and cliff sides, trying to be as stealthy as I can for as long as possible before being discovered by the enemy. Once the artillery positions have been blown away, the second act comes in, and it's here where you find yourself at a command table with the general in charge of the entire operation. After getting a well-deserved promotion and being given your own squad, the game lets you pick and choose what kind of units you want to take with you, giving you some agency over how you and your squad are going to approach the coming objectives, adding some nice gameplay variety. If you've got a good enough charisma stat and speech skill, you can get your hands on a Gauss rifle from the quartermaster, which is really nice since it's basically an extremely hard-hitting energy sniper rifle with the only downside of having to reload after every shot, a lot like the Tesla cannon. In one portion of the second act, you need to destroy fuel reserves for Chinese tanks that have been hammering away at the Americans, and it is here where you come face to face with an actual tank. It's pretty cool to see Bethesda implement a functional enemy vehicle into the expansion, but I do wish it was harder to fight. It isn't very accurate in its attacks, and if you collect enough grenades, you can take it out pretty quickly. Regardless, I can still appreciate that Bethesda tried something new here. Once you've completed some objectives in prep for the final act, the final advance begins, and it's at this point when I was playing the game where I started to really like the idea of a Fallout game set in an area where snow is abundant, because the snow-covered battlefields of Anchorage, Alaska stand out from not only Fallout 3's environment, but also the environments of the rest of the franchise. I can totally see a snow-covered world like this being a great addition to a future Fallout game, because running around in the trenches as you battle against the Reds feels like nothing else you can experience anywhere else in Fallout, and I want more of it.
Oh no! Oh no! No, no! No, no, no.
The final act must be my favorite part of the expansion, because you get to see the full scale of the battle for Anchorage, and also because it is here where you jump in on the action on the front line. This entire part is just one massive advance towards victory, and it feels really damn good to push all the way to the enemy HQ and cut down the Chinese general in an honor duel as all of your power armor clad allies fight alongside you. This is a great ending to the DLC, but it has one major problem where multiple glitches can occur that are highly game-breaking and could set you back pretty far if you don't save before entering the Chinese HQ as a precaution. Sometimes when you enter the gate and the Chinese general executes the captured American in front of him, he won't speak to you at all, and you're forced to just stand there until you load a previous save. If this doesn't happen and everything proceeds as normal, sometimes when you're in the middle of fighting the general, one of the American power armor dudes will aggro on you and just shoot the shit out of you. Oh, what the fuck, bro? I'm on your team. I'm on your team. Why you gotta do— oh, shit! Because he's shooting at you, the story won't end, even if you defeat the general. And if you attack him back, the rest of the Americans will aggro on you too. So like before, you end up not having any other choice than to load a save. I wish I could say that these glitches didn't happen that often, but I can't. I will never forget playing this for the first time, having it bug out on me, and I didn't know to save before entry, so I was sent back like 45 minutes of game time. Once the simulation ends and you unlock the armory for the Brotherhood outcasts, you get your hands on a real Gauss rifle, as well as the best piece of loot in the expansion, a full suit of winterized T-51B power armor that is also the best armor in the entire game.
Tight, yeah!
What's interesting about the winterized T-51B is that when Bethesda developed the armor for Operation Anchorage, they intended there to be two different versions of the armor. One set you find the Americans using in the simulation, which has nearly 10 million health, and another that has more balanced stats, which is meant to be present in the armory for you to loot after leaving the simulation. But in classic Bethesda fashion, a glitch causes the version with close to 10 million health to be the one that you find in the armory. With that being said, the new winterized T-51B is nigh indestructible. So again, is it a bug? Or is it a feature? Because this seems like a pretty big bug to have never been patched out. Even though you don't get the suit that you were intended to, I love the winterized armor a lot. It's great that you can get a suit that will never break, so you have one less thing to have to constantly worry about repairing. The suit being unbreakable isn't really a problem at all. The problem is that Operation Anchorage can be completed straight out of Vault 101. So if you meet the outcasts right at the outset of the game, you can get your hands on the armor incredibly easily. If you get this suit too early, which is entirely possible, you skip over the entirety of armor progression, and it trivializes a lot of the combat in the early game because you become somewhat untouchable, as early enemies aren't strong enough to effectively punch through its stats to harm you. If Operation Anchorage was much more of a challenge at a lower level, this wouldn't be an issue, but the difficulty of the enemies is designed to match yours, so even at level 1, it's pretty easy to complete the simulation. What I typically like to do is wait until I've beaten the main story to do Operation Anchorage, because if you get the armor after having done the rest of the base game's content, the winterized armor feels like a proper endgame reward. Once you get the armor for yourself, the outcasts betray each other over the loot, and as a consequence, you have to cut down a number of them while also hopefully saving the lives of the cooler ones out of the bunch. I can appreciate that if you do save their lives, you end up with some friends in the Brotherhood outcasts, even though the survivors will continue to resemble that traditional BOS that doesn't really like outsiders. Operation Anchorage is an epic adventure with loads of action that provides a first-person view into what the battle to repel Chinese invaders out of Alaska may have been like, even though the simulation itself is more than likely American propaganda. Even though canonically the US emerged victorious in that battle, the simulation cannot be trusted to tell an accurate account of what truly happened, as the Chinese are 100% portrayed to be faceless in an attempt to dehumanize them, and in every moment of every situation you're put into, the Americans kick ass throughout all of it. The US government in the Fallout universe be like,
the possibility of successfully navigating an asteroid field is approximately 3,720 to 1.
Never tell me the odds.
Although this DLC is a lot more linear, and in some cases can straight up screw up the progression and the balance, it's got an interesting story, desirable weapons and armor, fun gameplay, and a totally unique aesthetic in the snowy tundra that make it go down as a phenomenal expansion that I always enjoy. The next DLC to be released following Operation Anchorage was the Pitt, and this is the first out of all of Fallout 3's expansions to take you to a location that is far away from the capital wasteland. The Pitt is a very fitting name because it's set in what remains of Pittsburgh, and a detail that I like when making your way to the city is that before you cross the iconic 10th Street Bridge into Pittsburgh, you come across a sign that clearly used to say, "Welcome to Pittsburgh," but after 200 years, half the name has been graffitied off and now it just says, "Welcome to the Pitt." There are plenty of examples throughout the franchise where a location is named after what's left of a word on an old world sign, and for some reason I just love when the developers do this. I think it's a really clever way to name a town or a city. Also, I think the introduction of Pittsburgh being this really ominous looking bridge that you have to cross as you avoid mines and feral dogs is a great way to set the atmosphere for the Pit, because it lets you know very early on that you were headed into something dark.
Now the main problem area is up here. All of this going on up here is what's causing me the most physical discomfort. It's like a visceral reaction of discontent coming from this area.
And it comes as no surprise when Bethesda starts to lean this experience into horror like the base game excels at. A lot like the previous DLC, there aren't any new side quests here that have been added, but I think the main storyline is engaging and well written in its own right, as the story follows slaves that are being oppressed by an army of raiders. When you meet the slaves, a woman named Medea idea tells you about the dangers of the Pitt's radiation being different from elsewhere in the wasteland, and that her people have been preparing to revolt by quietly arming themselves for when the time is right. In order to help them earn their freedom, you have to do some work for the Raiders, and it's at this point where the DLC starts to dip further into those horror elements, when you are introduced to the Pitt's decently sized explorable area known as the Steel Yard. Completing your objectives here is no easy feat, because shortly after entering the Pit, all of your gear gets stripped away, forcing you to scavenge for whatever will help you survive since you have no weapons, armor, or ammo. Another aspect of the Steel Yard that makes it so dangerous is the unique radiation that resides here, as it has a different effect than most other places in the world, because instead of turning humans into ghouls, too much exposure can cause humans to mutate into what the people here call trogs.
What the hell is even that?
Trogs are nasty quadrupedal humanoids that are really fast, can jump really far, and since you have no effective armor to protect yourself with, they can take you out relatively quickly if you are outnumbered or don't act fast enough. It's just another horrific creature that was once a father, mother, son, or daughter, and this tragic reality is conveyed early, as the first Trog you have to put down is recognized by his older brother shortly before it murders him in cold blood. The Steel Yard is the Pit's best area because it's just more exhilarating exploration and it's dark as shit, so there's usually loads of these things just hiding in the darkness, waiting for an opportunity to jump out and scare you, and I promise, they will scare you. Unfortunately, the biggest issue that I have with the Pit has to do with its best area, because for whatever reason, an entire chunk of the yard was completely inaccessible to me because the rooftop you have to walk on to get there had no collision. So once I'd reach a certain spot on the roof as I'm trying to get to the stairs not far in front of me, I'd just fall through the ceiling time and time again, and at one point I saw an enemy shooting at me through the wall of this exact building, and I didn't understand why until as I was falling, I could see them falling through the floor to their deaths as well. I've played the Pit a few times now, and for whatever reason, it wasn't until I sat here writing this script that I noticed that I'm starting to look at what is an accumulating list of at least one game-breaking bug per expansion, which is pretty wild. I'm sure you can imagine how by this point, I have begun to find myself wondering how a game of such quality can have so much shit that is so blatantly broken go unpatched.
It's so dumb.
So dumb, it's brilliant.
No! It's just dumb.
A definite highlight of this DLC is when you're thrown into some sort of gladiator arena, and you're forced to take on multiple waves of enemies that get more challenging as you go. As a reward for winning the final fight, you get a cool unique assault rifle called the Infiltrator that resembles other ARs in the Capital Wasteland, aside from its sleek black color and it having some snazzy attachments. Unfortunately for this gun, it's not much better than a standard AR, so beyond using it for the rest of the DLC, it gets outclassed by a lot of other things, so it's only viable for a very short time. Even less so if you choose to use your own gear anyway, because once you're out of the gauntlet, the Raiders give you all your stuff back. And by the way, foreshadowing for the future, I am not a fan of when expansions take my gear away from me, so I was pretty happy when I got all my shit back. After the fights, you finally meet Asher, the leader of the Raiders, in his gruesomely decorated palace, and it is here where the story's bombshell of a plot twist happens. Until this point, there have been some whispers from slaves of a sort of cure, something that can be stolen from the Raiders and used as leverage against them. Well, it turns out that what the slaves didn't tell you is that the cure is a living, breathing baby girl, who was born with a natural immunity to the Pit's unique brand of radiation. So this is where the big moral question that makes the Pit so popular comes into play. On one hand, you have an army of raiders oppressing hundreds of slaves that are working to rebuild Pittsburgh, as well as trying to create a remedy to the radiation that endangers everyone. And on the other hand, you have slaves that rightfully want their freedom and have bamboozled you into kidnapping a child to use as leverage against her family. This is one of my favorite moral dilemmas that Bethesda presents you with in Fallout 3, because a lot like the Tenpenny Tower quest, no matter which option you go with, you're gonna have to do something that you don't want to do to reach the end result. I also love how choosing to either side with the raiders or the slaves is actually a tough question, because there are justifiable reasons for siding with the villains in this story. The child's mother, who you meet shortly after Asher, is a scientist, and she has everything necessary to be able to safely create a cure for the rest of Pittsburgh. Siding with the raiders means the slaves don't get their freedom, but there's a much better chance chance that a cure will eventually be created under the direction of an actual scientist. Imagine the kind of good that can come from a single baby with a natural immunity to the world's biggest threat post-nuclear war. Siding with the slaves will earn them their freedom from tyranny, but you are forced to kidnap the baby and later flood the raider-occupied areas with trogs that go on to kill everyone they see, including her parents. Since there are no real scientists around anymore after the revolution, and the baby is now being raised by Medea, a cure most likely never sees the light of day because she's too busy caring for the infant. The slaves get their freedom, but they're still doomed to die of all kinds of deadly diseases as well as eventually mutating into trogs because of the radiation. It's great how the raiders are written to be the main antagonists of the story, while also giving you compelling reasons as to why choosing to ally with them could be the better option, even though your morals may naturally pull you towards freeing the slaves just because it's the right thing to do. Out of all the DLCs, this is the first and only one that puts you in a position where you have to make a difficult and nuanced decision by the end of the story, and it stands out amongst them because of it. By the time it's over, I always find myself loving the narrative, which is a massive plus for this expansion, but where I find it lacking is in the loot. I find the Pitt's offerings to be very underwhelming compared to other DLCs, because there just aren't any new weapons or armor or anything of the sort that I would ever want to continue using once I've completed it. The setting and atmosphere is without a doubt one of the Pitt's big wins. It's just more of what I have always loved about the Capital Wasteland in a new and interesting location. It's unfortunate that I experienced such a game-breaking bug when exploring the steel yard, because that whole area is really fun to explore. But when you're restricted because of something so stupid, it just makes you feel frustrated over the sheer stupidity of it. Bethesda's greatest strength is their exploration, but combine that with their greatest weakness of not fixing massive bugs, and it can ruin your experience extremely fast. Nevertheless, when you play the Pitt, it's really easy to understand why it's one of Fallout 3's most popular expansions, and for me, it sits up there with the previous two because of its high quality and entertainment value. Thus far, Fallout 3 is 3 for 3, and its fourth DLC, called Point Lookout, only improves on that ratio. Point Lookout is the second expansion to take you away from the Capital Wasteland for the duration of the DLC, as it's set in a state park of the same name down in Maryland. An aspect of this setting that makes it unique from most other DLCs in Fallout 3 is that Point Lookout is just one brand new gigantic open world area that can be explored in a totally non-linear way, like the base game, which is Point Lookout's greatest strength. Point Lookout is also unique in that it was never hit by any nukes, so technically it isn't really a nuclear wasteland. The place mostly just appears to have been lost to time, as most structures are still intact, aside from the level of decay that you'd expect to occur over 200 years.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
Most of this huge new map consists of swamplands, which is a first for the series, and as a result, visibility is often foggy from the moisture in the air. Point Lookout keeps that incredibly oppressive and often scary atmosphere that I can't stop talking about, but what I like the most about it is that as a little cherry on top, there seems to be hints of some level of supernatural activity here.
Spooky, scary skeletons and shivers down your spine.
When you're exploring, it's very common to come across dolls hanging from trees, or even what appear to be ritualistic totems made out of human remains. Something else you will find in Point Lookout is a whopping 5 new side quests, all of which are pretty good. Like one called Plick Safari is just a gauntlet where you slaughter ghouls and try to keep your allies alive. And another called A Spoonful of Whiskey involves you helping a woman gather ingredients to brew moonshine. I think quests like these can be pretty enjoyable, but they are definitely more simple than the better side quests like the Velvet Curtain, where you follow the steps of an old pre-war Chinese spy mission to destroy a sunken submarine. As a reward for this one, you get a sweet lever-action rifle called the Backwater Rifle, and let me say, you guys know how I feel about cowboy guns, so I am always loving this thing. Fortunately, it's actually a decent weapon compared to others from the base game, so in the endgame, it remains viable, unlike another DLC. As a bonus reward, you might even experience submechanophobia, because this sunken submarine always gives me the heebie-jeebies. Thank God There are no sharks or anything in this game, good lord. There's also an antique land where you go around the map inspecting natural gas deposits caused by mass burials of soldiers from the American Civil War that, when put in containers, act like a unique variant of grenade. The holy grail of all of the quests here for me, even including the main story, is the Dark Heart of Blackhall. This quest is my favorite because it leans into those supernatural elements that I mentioned before. In Point Lookout, you can expect to see a few familiar enemies like ghouls, mirelurks, and other hostile wildlife, but the newest enemies that Point Lookout brings to the table are the swamp folk. Swamp folk are best described as incestual redneck cannibal families that will do everything in their power to kill and eat you like so many they have encountered before. Sometimes they'll charge at you with an axe, and sometimes they'll blow chunks out of your health with a repeater or double-barreled shotgun. This thing is one of the most powerful weapons in the game, but it's balanced to fire both barrels at the same time, making you reload after every single shot. Especially in combination with the backwater rifle, you got yourself some deadly boomers that are a lot of fun to use. No matter what the swamp folk use, even at max level, they are formidable foes, and I felt now was the proper time to bring them up because they are the centerpiece of the Dark Heart of Blackhall. This quest is great because it directly links to some of the most interesting stories in the base game that are found in the Dunwich building.
Oh shit, here we go again.
The Dunwich building is a location that we talked about in great depth in my main review because of how interesting it is. It tells a total of 3 different stories, but the main one involved a son looking for his father who tracked him to the office building. In the story, a man named Jamie found his father ghoulified in the basement next to a mysterious book and some sort of obelisk that seemingly drove him mad. Well, in Point Lookout, you can find a location called Blackhall Manor, and inside resides a man named Obadiah. When you talk to him, he offers to fork up 1,000 caps for the safe return of an old family heirloom, a book that he claims was stolen by the swamp folk. After accepting the bounty and leaving the manor, just outside the front door, a woman named Marcella approaches you. She asks if Obadiah employed you to acquire a book, and then says when you find it, you should bring it to her so it can be destroyed. She makes outlandish claims that the book, known as the Krivbekna, is a source of evil power, and that the Blackhall family has a dark history with the object. According to Marcella, Obadiah seeks to reclaim it so he can use its power to control the swamp folk. At this point, the only evidence we have that even remotely suggests anything even somewhat supernatural is a man that went crazy and worshipped some kind of monument, as well as the numerous totems and dolls that are commonplace around Point Lookout. Even with all of that combined, there isn't really much to go on, so how could Marcella possibly be right about any of the otherworldly things that she claims? Well, eventually you track the book down to a ritual site, and after entering, the catacombs act as a dungeon with quite a few swamp folk standing in your way. At the end of the tunnels, you find what appears to be a sacrificial chamber, and inside a basin filled with human blood rests the Krivbekna. When you return to Marcella, you find her murdered body on the floor, and alongside her body is a tape containing her last words where she repents to God for her wrongdoings and not doing enough good of her own, and before passing away, begs you to return the book to the Dunwich building so it can be destroyed once and for all. So here's the dilemma. You have a man offering to give a fat stack of cash money for a book that is more than likely nothing more than a book, and a woman of faith begging you to keep it away from him because of its supposed immense power. Choosing to trust Marcella in her final moments and returning the book to the Dunwich building in the capital wasteland, down in the basement rests the strange structure that now only seems so familiar. When you press the Krivbekna against the structure, it bursts into flames, sending fire in every direction before it all extinguishes as fast as it appeared. This is without a doubt one of the best side quests in all of Fallout 3 because it expands on some of the most fascinating stories that are incredibly easy to miss. If you're playing Point Lookout without having already discovered Dunwich beforehand, this quest will lead you right to it, and you will experience everything that that dungeon has to offer at the exact same time. But if you're like me and are playing Point Lookout after exploring Dunwich, then it's just another delicious chunk of what was already well-written lore. I just know Bethesda knew that they had a banger on their hands here because they wanted players to experience Dunwich so badly that they developed an entire side quest to expand on that story and take you there. The only downside to this quest is that it's the only one in all of Point Lookout that presents you with a dilemma that feels like it matters. Most of the other side quests from this DLC don't even test your morals, since most only set out to tell one specific story. Due to the supernatural elements that this one dips into, it doesn't feel like it would matter all too much, but by the the end of it, choosing to either destroy the Krivbekna or return it to Blackhall Manor turns out to be a big decision because it all turns out to be true. Feeling like I've made a difference in this quest is what makes me like it more than even the main story of Point Lookout. Though I do want to be clear that I do still really like the main plotline because I think the concept is pretty sweet. The whole thing revolves around two old world rival politicians that in one way or another are still alive and both want the other one dead. I think the way this was handled in the writing is pretty great because what's really going on isn't revealed to you until near the end of the expansion. The first person you're introduced to is a ghoul named Desmond in some decrepit old mansion. And before you even get a chance to talk to the man, an overwhelming number of tribals start bursting through the doors. This is a really strong opening because it does a great job at representing Desmond's will to fight and survive, as well as setting up the conflict between him and the tribals in a spectacular way. This fight, even at a high level, is quite the challenge, and I always have a lot of fun running through the halls of the mansion, fighting off the tribals and cutting off their entryways. Yeah, sit in that chair. Sit in that chair and think about what you've done. They hit hard all the time, and they throw quite a few of them at you at once, so it's common to end up repeating this part a couple times if you don't know what to expect and haven't saved it all. Once you defeat the tribals and agree to work with Desmond, the story begins to unravel as you infiltrate the cult and are sent to gain rite of passage by huffing on some fart gas from a sacred plant that makes you trip balls.
It's a giant mushroom.
Maybe it's friendly!
This is another part of the story that I like a lot because it gives you some insight into the Lone Wanderer's state of mind, and the things he thinks about are sad. Oversized Vault-Tec bobbleheads litter the trail, and when interacted with, they reveal that he feels afraid of the situation he currently finds himself in, and that he feels like he has no place in this world. We also learn that he has abandonment issues from his father leaving Vault 101, and as a result, he feels that everyone he loves ends up leaving him in one way or another. And before the end of the trip, you encounter his mother's skeleton, and he fears that she would have abandoned him too, like his father did. This is a phenomenal part of the expansion because it gives you important insight into how the Lone Wanderer is handling everything he's been put through in his short 19 years of life. No matter how capable anyone is, there is no way that you would be able to deal with the things the Lone Wanderer does without walking away from it all completely trauma-free. Even though Fallout 3 is a role-playing game, I appreciate that they still gave some character to your character, because it's perfectly reasonable for him to have fears, even as a jack-of-all-trades, master-of-everything badass. After earning membership into the tribe, you finally learn that it was Calvert, the other politician who is now only a brain and has been sending the tribals to do his bidding because they view his hologram as their god. Once his physical location has been located, there is one final confrontation between the ghoul and the brain, and this is where you are presented with a rather unengaging decision because both politicians are trying to get you to help kill the other, but this beef is between them. There are certainly engaging moments in the main story of Point Lookout, but because their beef goes back centuries and you don't know much about either of them other than they're longtime rivals that despise each other, the finale has no weight to it. There is nothing stopping you from just killing the both of them. If you choose to save the brain instead of the ghoul, the brain will just straight up betray you and try to kill you too, ultimately ending the story with both of them dead anyway. On the ghoul's side of things, he isn't even a likable character. He's actually written to be incredibly unlikable because he thinks he's hot shit that needs no help from anyone, and he insults you constantly. So really, the only reason not to kill him is that he won't try to kill you, so siding with him is the choice that simply ends with one of them still standing, which compared to other choices you have to make in Fallout 3, it feels very unimportant because you aren't invested in their beef whatsoever by the time the story ends. I've always felt that Point Lookout's finale felt a little anticlimactic after everything you had to deal with to learn what's going on in the narrative, as well as locate Calvert once he's been discovered. After all this time, I still think that Point Lookout is my favorite DLC of them all, because to me, it has the most going for it with very little to take away from the experience. It has a setting unlike any other, it continues the atmosphere that Fallout 3 is known for, as well as having the best map out of any of the other expansions because it's the largest and most fun to explore with cool locations and loot to discover.
That's why he's the GOAT! The GOAT!
In my opinion, it's the most fun place to be in following the base game, with side quests that are intriguing and a narrative that is pretty good too, even with its anticlimactic ending. This DLC is really the most well-rounded experience when it comes to things that I look for in both Fallout games and their expansions. Following Point Lookout, Fallout 3 got only one more DLC, and Bethesda was clearly feeling a little bit silly and wanted to go out with a bang, because before they fully transitioned to working on Skyrim, they released Mothership Zeta. Mothership Zeta is a weird and wacky expansion because it's all about mowing down little green aliens called Zetans that are without a doubt among Fallout 3's most dangerous enemies. Fallout has dabbled with the idea of extraterrestrial stuff even as far back as the first game, but in all of those instances, aliens were relegated to random encounters. Well, when Bethesda got to work on the final expansion, they decided to just full send it and make an entire DLC revolving around being kidnapped by aliens and trying to escape the mothership. This one feels a lot more like Operation Anchorage because it's very linear in its design, isn't really scary at all, lacks any major moral dilemmas, and is very action-packed. A lot of the time in Mothership Zeta, you're being guided down a fixed path with only a few easily missable areas that are hidden in plain sight. Similar to not only that expansion, but also the Pitt, there aren't any new side quests or anything along those lines. It may be linear, but what balances this out is that the story makes you feel for the characters that you meet here, because it's a very character-driven story. Some characters are deeper than others, like Soma. The first person you meet is definitely more on the shallow end. There just isn't really a whole lot to learn about her. The next person you meet, only a few short minutes after you start Mothership Zeta, is a little girl named Sally, who might just be the star of the show. Since Sally is a little girl, she can crawl through vents and unlock doors for you, and a funny thing about her is that she's very familiar with the layout of the ship because she frequently escapes captivity, and the aliens just kind of find her mildly annoying, so they just keep throwing her back in her cell. Her backstory is depressing as hell because you learn from her, and listening to a recording from when she was captured, that she, along with her sister, were kidnapped not long after the nuclear war that killed their parents. When they were taken aboard the ship, they separated the two little girls, and Sally never saw her sister ever again. Sally leads you to a room with cryopods containing other people inside them who are all from different time periods. One dude is a Japanese samurai who doesn't speak a lick of English, so he can't be communicated with. Another is an American astronaut who didn't survive the thaw. The third man is Paulson, a cowboy from the Old West, and the last is Private Elliot, a US Army medic from the Battle of Anchorage, Alaska. This crew of people from hundreds of years apart in time have to band together in order to take the fight to the aliens and give everything they've got to escape. As you spend time around them, you learn that everyone that has a backstory can relate to one another and that they have experienced great tragedy at the hands of the aliens. Paulson at first is reluctant to share how he was abducted, but after finding a recording of him, he opens up about how he, his wife, and son were all taken together, and the aliens took the people he loved away from him as they screamed and begged for him to save them when he couldn't. My favorite character of them all is Private Elliot, who throughout the narrative is the most vocal about wanting to get to the bottom of what their plans might be for the people they're abducting. And it's with him where you get to see the extent of these kidnappings. The moment where you come across the room where his squad mates are being dissected on operating tables is a highly memorable one because of how he reacts to what he's seeing. Watching his men be mutilated and experimented on gets him pretty pissed, and it only strengthens his resolve to get back at the aliens.
We tired of playing with your ass, nigga. Today your ass is gonna die, bitch. Say goodnight, motherfucker.
There's also a pretty solid moment where you find even more of his squad mates that the ETs were prepping for an operation, and you can encourage him to wake them up so they can die fighting, or you can convince him to put them out of their misery so they can't be used as test subjects. It's not really a big decision that's going to test your morals or anything like that, because the men always die regardless, but it is there, and it is cool that you can make even a little bit of a difference in this moment, especially since this is the only decision that you are presented with in all of Mothership Zeta. All of these characters are well written because you grow to sympathize with them, and it makes it more fun trying to take on the challenge of keeping them alive until the end. I do find it funny that since the samurai dude doesn't speak any English, not a single person in the crew understands what the hell he's saying, so he isn't really part of the story. You meet him and then you kind of just forget that he's there, and so does everyone else, because at some point he'll just disappear, and when you ask everyone where he went, all you get is a collective shrug. Each of your companions has a specific area that they will follow you into, and once all the objectives have been completed, you split off from the group to find a new way forward, and to do so, you have to do a spacewalk, and I have to say, this part blows me away every single time. It's so simple, and there isn't really anything happening, but the thought of walking on the outside of a giant spaceship is absolutely terrifying, and what makes this fear feel even more real is that when you get too close to the edge, you'll lose your footing and slowly drift off into space. After the spacewalk, Mothership Zeta introduces you to the Abominations, which are these freakish humanoid beings that the aliens created using their human captives.
Holy Jesus. What is that? What the fuck is that?
If there is anything that's scary about this expansion, it would be these guys, but unfortunately they aren't too much of a threat compared to the standard aliens, and there aren't that many of them that you end up encountering. The finale of Mothership Zeta is such a great note to end the Fallout 3 journey on, because once you've made your way to the bridge and have successfully commandeered the ship, everyone joins you at the helm of the giant spacecraft, and the aliens aren't too happy about your little revolution. So they call in another mothership, and you engage with the other craft in a battle where you have to maintain the power of your shields, giant laser weapon, and make sure you time the shield drop well enough so that you can fire at the other ship and be unprotected for as little time as possible. Not only that, but you're doing all of this while there is wave after wave of aliens rushing the bridge trying to recapture it from you. And this is where keeping the people in your group alive until the end comes in handy, because they will watch your back as you deal with the bigger threat. What makes it even better is that this is where the samurai dude shows up again out of nowhere and valiantly fends off the aliens with his sword. The battle concludes with another one of Fallout 3's great visual spectacles as the enemy ship explodes violently, ending the story of the Lone Wanderer. You can tell that Bethesda intended this to be an endgame expansion, because I do not see a low-level player being able to complete it without a lot of frustration from being clobbered by the aliens, as well as constantly being showered with powerful weapons. Like seriously, even in the base game, the Lone Wanderer's alien blaster was a beast, but Mothership Zeta's alien weapons pretty much blow everything else in the game out of the water, since a lot of them can deal up to near 200 damage. I found a rifle called the Destabilizer that does 199 damage in perfect condition. That shit is insane. There's even a spot on the ship that acts as a shooting range where if you kill enough enemies there, you'll be rewarded with a perk that makes all of the alien weapons even more powerful. The more I think about it, the more I can see Bethesda just being like, fuck it, this is the end of the game, and more than likely this is the last thing that they're gonna do in the game, so might as well just shower the player with all kinds of overpowered weapons. By the end, that doesn't really affect anything, because again, this is more than likely gonna be the last thing that you do in the game. I've played Mothership Zeta like 5 times, and I'm still a massive fan of it. It's got a fun plot line, more great loot, you all know how much I love my loot, and also, fighting aliens just feels awesome because they're so different from any of the other enemies in the game, and the crazy thing about all of this is that I think it fits in Fallout. The Zetans were mysterious in previous entries before Fallout 3 came out, and they remain mysterious even with an entire DLC dedicated to them. As you go about exploring the ship, you find a lot of voice recordings that they had been collecting from their captives, like Sally's and Paulson's tapes, that reveal so much about the other people that they have already abducted. There's tapes you can listen to from even more people from hundreds of years in the past, and there are also a lot of recordings that are from people who had a lot of influence in the United States, like the assistant CEO of Vault-Tec, and also some US military people that the aliens seem to be taking a greater interest in. One tape you can find has a man trying to resist the urge to give up information about US nukes and their launch codes as the aliens try to force their way into his mind. This one tape actually sparked theories that it may have potentially been the aliens that destroyed the world as an experiment to see how humanity would progress from near total annihilation. After all, why would the aliens want launch codes for US nukes? It makes you think. Now that we've covered all 5 of Fallout 3's DLCs, I can now put down the game and walk away feeling satisfied with the way I've spent my time here. Among them, there is loads of variety in just about every aspect that you can think of, and while none of them are perfect, all of their individual successes come together to make them great. So what do you think about Fallout 3's DLC? Do you agree or disagree with any of the points that I've made in this video? If so, please feel free to leave your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below. I swear, I do my best to try to read and respond to as many as I possibly can. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and if you did, please smack that like button because every single one helps the channel grow. We still have a lot of Fallout stuff to cover on the channel, folks, so if you're interested in seeing a Fallout New Vegas video, which is going to be the next game that I tackle in this franchise, make sure that you hit that subscribe button so that way you can stick around. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate every single one of you for taking the time out of your day to give this video a watch, and I will catch you guys later.